So yeah, I mean, I don't really want to record this video, but here we are. So last round of the tournament, I'm playing against Domagoj Dragicevic, FIDE master from Melbourne. The last time I played him was actually when I was 14 years old maybe. I had the black pieces in that game, it was some Catalan. It was the first time actually I ever played the Catalan in a classical game. I drew it, it was like some long 4-hour fin, and this time, like 7 years later maybe, I have the white pieces. This time I'm higher rated, and we go into a Catalan starting with the following moves. And I was a little bit suspicious here because from what I knew, Domagoj didn't really have a big track record of playing knight f6 e6 against d4. He used to be very much a Grunfeld player, going after knight c3 d5, and on occasion I've also seen him dabble in the Queen's Gambit accepted, so I was kind of expecting one of those two and was slightly surprised to see him go for this, but I just decided, right, like, okay, I'll just go for what I know best, the Catalan opening, and he goes d takes d4, which you usually do not play unless you've prepared something specific, because it's very concrete and it does carry some level of risk, of course, taking the pawn and releasing the tension so early on in the game. But okay, he shows what he has prepared on this move by playing knight d7. There are many different options they can go for. They can go bishop b4 check, a6, knight c6, c5, bishop d7. Let's just say there's no shortage of moves that black can try in this position, and knight b7 is one that I've never faced in a classical game before. I know it exists and I've studied it a bit, but if I'm being honest, didn't really know like a whole lot on it. But okay, I went a4, which I was trying to remember, like, do I castle or play a4? It turns out they very often transpose, but a4 is slightly rarer after c6, so castles. I have studied this exact position before where black can play a5, and I remember because of some conversation I had in the comments with someone who commented on my video 20 ideas every Catalan player must know. They were asking about this knight d7 line, and I talked through with them, gave them some analysis, and it went something like the following. So like b5 in this position after queen c2, logically defending the pawn, and after takes, knight e5, creating some pressure on this diagonal, knight d5, knight c3. I remember that in this position black should probably play knight takes e5, takes queen b6, protecting this but also giving this pawn up. And to be honest, I couldn't remember all of the details, but I did remember that white was supposed to be a bit better if they at least played sort of the precise moves. However, while I again did remember some of this actually ended up not even being relevant in this game, because Domagoj, despite a5 being the most common approach in this position with the whole knight b7 variation, went for something completely different, b6. And to be honest, I thought this was just some like bullcrap he was making up on the spot, especially since he like fought a minute or two on this move. But to be honest, that might have been a bit of a psychological ploy into tricking myself into thinking he hadn't done any preparation, or maybe he wasn't even trying to do that, he was trying to recall what he was supposed to do. I don't know, but b6 I thought was a bit strange. It turns out it's a playable idea. White might have an advantage with accurate play, but after spending some time thinking, I ended up playing knight of d2 because I felt like I could make use of the fact here that I'm now attacking two pawns at once, because after b6 they sort of soften the c6 point, right? And if they just like develop trying to defend that, I go knight takes c4 and knight c3, maybe e4, and I have this sort of domination in the center, and I feel like this is a pretty good position. Compared to, say, if I go like, I don't know, queen c2, and then like we have something of this nature, they quickly go c5, bishop e7 castles, develop their pieces very actively. Of course, gaining the pawn break as well was very important, and in general, I just felt like it would be very difficult to create any sort of advantage from this sort of position. Maybe the one thing I could try and argue I have, let's say something like this happens, is that maybe black c6 square is slightly weak. This is an idea sometimes in the Catalan, but at best it's just a very, very small advantage, and I thought I could get a little bit more out of the position by playing something like knight of d2 again with the ideas I mentioned earlier. However, I was struck by bishop a6 very quickly. Domagoj really showing that he has prepared some stuff at this point. Although I remember during the game, definitely I was still in this like state of somewhat doubting that he actually prepared this. I'm like, there's no way this can actually be good. But yeah, I mean, with how like strong Stockfish is in like 2024, you really cannot assume anything. A lot of the things that look really weird are in fact actually good. So I decided to take the pawn, otherwise what was the point of knight of d2? I hesitated a bit though, because after rook c8 I wasn't completely sure what I should be doing. For example, if I just drop the bishop back, if black just develops sort of like quote unquote. Normally I thought that probably I have some sort of advantage here, especially if I get in like knight b5 for example, attacking this pawn, and they don't really want to take that. This is very unpleasant. However, after rook c8, bishop g2 again, I thought that in this position black would probably play knight b8, which looks like a bit of a strange move, but basically has the idea that from d7 the knight is actually kind of badly restricted at the moment, and also by placing the knight again on this more backward square, you can sort of force a like concession out of white, where they now have to put the knight probably on f3, where it takes some of the pressure off the c4 pawn potentially. Not to mention that once it goes to f3 you can then bring the bishop back to the more natural b7 square, control some of the light squares in the center. It's going to be very difficult for white to ever establish, say, a pawn on e4, and for that reason I believe this position was probably relatively okay for black. The engine says white maybe has a little bit something, but to be honest I kind of felt like, okay, I want a little bit more than this. And also I should mention the reason we have to bring the knight to f3 is that if we go pawn to e3, I saw that they would get c3, and with these two pieces hanging I probably have to give up an exchange, and maybe I have compensation, but I did not really believe in it. So that is why I was spending a lot of time here also thinking about this option bishop b5, where now if they again tried to bring the bishop to this diagonal, well, at least in this scenario I thought like it's very likely we're just going to be winning the c4 pawn, and if they also just exchange the bishops, well, then again they have to watch out for how are they going to defend this. It's not exactly trivial. This pawn is also very likely going to fall after some like sort of rook a4 thing, or maybe queen a4, knight takes c4, not too sure, but either way looking quite nice for white, I thought. But again, Domagoj plays quickly bishop b7, and to be honest, given that this is such a strange position, it was kind of difficult to anticipate like whether or not he was actually like gonna take this, or you know, then sacrifice the c4 pawn as he did. So I wasn't completely sure yet what I was gonna do. Was I gonna like take on c4? Was I gonna do this? I was pretty confident though either way, regardless of what I do. What is coming next from black is they're not gonna just develop their pieces. They're gonna make use of the fact their rook is still on h8, launch their h pawn, and start going absolute mayhem on the king side. So I decided after some thinking, I can't remember the exact variations I calculated, but I just decided to develop my knight first to c3 and not really commit to capturing this. He goes h5 as I kind of mentioned, and at this point I am playing pretty principled moves, but on my next move and the moves sort of following that after, I start going a little bit astray as it becomes kind of difficult to anticipate all of the complications that arise from this position. Objectively, white is still supposed to be better with e4, which in hindsight makes a lot of sense, just sort of trying to control the center and also kind of blocks the scope of this bishop on the diagonal. After h4, the computer wants to reinforce the center with queen e2. I believe not rook e1 though, because I think after this the computer says equal. My assumption as to why this is the case is that with the rook on e1, both of these knights are pinned, and tactically that kind of gets a bit awkward when we say like want to take like this pawn for example, whereas if we go queen e2, that is less so the case, because like this is not going to be pinning any piece on the e1 square. Not to mention it's also adding another attacker there. I'm sure that has something to do with it. But okay, I ended up after some thinking playing bishop takes c4. I should also mention I didn't want to play knight takes c4 because after a6 I thought this would be a little bit awkward, this sort of position. Maybe I was also looking to queen takes d7. I just felt very awkward about giving up my light squared bishop in general. Of course knight takes b6 does not work, by the way, because queen c6 is a very nasty fork. I don't know why I draw a narrow back to the rook, but we have friendly mate and the knight at the same time can't defend both. So that probably means my knight has to go somewhere like maybe e5, and to be honest maybe this isn't so bad because the queen can't go into any of these entry squares and infiltrate. Maybe after h4 maybe we can get an either e4 if we protect that sufficiently, or maybe just blunt the bishop with f3, and perhaps we do have some advantage because we're up a pawn and maybe they don't have enough compensation. Maybe there's even bishop g5 as well, stopping h4 directly. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to check what the engine says. Okay, it says white actually has quite an advantage here. Okay, that's interesting. So I might have underestimated this a bit. Knight takes d7 is also an option though, and the computer says, or at least it seems a bit more optimistic about this for black, saying that queen d3 is the only way to keep an advantage, and after h4 you have to go like bishop f4 takes. I don't know how true this is. This is like a low depth engine on lichess, but okay, that's some stuff to keep in mind. Nonetheless, I went bishop takes e4, and after h4 I played e3 after much thinking, and this is again where things start to go a bit downhill. Takes, of course I'm not going to play h takes g3, I'm going to play f takes g3, all playing this fairly quickly. And now Domagoj kind of takes his first real think of the game. He plays bishop d6. And I have to say, like, all the way back from here when I was calculating bishop takes c4, I was very much envisioning after h4, e3, takes, that I was just going to play bishop e2, bishop f3, counter the bishop on this diagonal, be up a pawn, and then try to like convert my advantage. So when we got to this position and I saw bishop d6, naturally I was still considering I'm going to go bishop e2, bishop f3, counter, all that stuff. But I wanted to make sure that given these dangerous pieces, looking right into my king's soul right now, that I wasn't just going to be getting run over some sort of like knight g4, like rook h2, bringing the queen in sort of sacrifice. For example, like one thing I was calculating during the game was like, how problematic is this? And I think rightly assumed that this would probably just be dead loss no matter which way I look at it. So I think after knight g4 check in this position, for example, I was planning like king g1 and then of course avoiding this sort of queen h4 idea, but I actually miscalculated even like this variation here, where it turns out that after king g1 they don't have to take when it's a little bit complicated. Instead they just go straight queen h4 anyway, and I somehow missed it. That would just be checkmate. So not off to a good start here, as you can see with bishop e2. I was also calculating like the other move order, whether they go knight g4 first and then take. I think I kind of concluded, whether correctly or not, that if I blocked stuff off with bishop f3, this would sort of be good, but obviously very risky to go bishop e2 in this position. As it turns out, the objectively best move is to go e4, block the bishop on this diagonal. For some reason during the game this was a very invisible move to me. I think probably because of the fact that my knight's kind of overloaded defending this and this, but of course you can't really concretely take and like take, because this just runs into knight d6 check, so pretty easy variation to calculate. But yeah, nonetheless I didn't play e4. It's not like I'm winning or anything after that. Like black still has compensation due to the pieces like the open h file and stuff, but at least after e4 it's not super easy to see what black should do. Whereas after bishop e2, which is what I played in the game, about a minute after I played it, I realized like, okay, I calculated this knight g4 stuff, this rook h2 stuff, but I forgot to consider if they just played bishop takes g3 immediately. By the way, I think after rook takes h2, this doesn't quite work for them because I have king h3, but the reason why it works is because in this position, apparently after knight d4, I'm better. I actually didn't see knight d4 sacrificing the queen in the game. I want to be very clear about this, but somehow this all just works out with a very precise series of moves, which again I definitely did see during the game. However, bishop takes g3 I did not calculate ahead of time, and or I mean I considered it, but I didn't really look into it that much because I was like, okay, I mean like they take it, they give a check here, and then it runs out and I like escape or something next, right? But then I realized, going back a little bit, that after bishop takes g3 check, they don't have to give like a check on h1 immediately. They can just patiently build up by bringing the queen to c7. I looked at the reverse order of like doing queen to c7 immediately, but I'm like, nah, it doesn't work. I just go knight b5 and fork this and this. Not really gonna work, right? But then I realized, oh, they just switch it around and they take first, I take back, then go queen c7. How do I defend against this? If I go king f2, now rook h2 check in one go, and then they come in and mate. That does not look good. So I was trying desperately to find if I can make this work, but I'm like, okay, this isn't working because like check, and then they windmill me. If I say get desperate and maybe try rook f3, this doesn't work because takes, queen takes g3 check, and king f1. And at the very least I thought they could go knight g4, threatening all sorts of stuff, and if I take that, then there's going to be rook h1, very problematic. So this was a very desperate moment, and after like more than half an hour of thinking Domagoj ended up playing this, I was kind of hoping for a bit that because he's been spending so much time, maybe he's like just spinning his wheels, he's just not even considering bishop takes g3, but after a while, somehow or another, he ended up stumbling upon the idea, ensuring that it worked, and I quickly replied bishop f3 because I saw no future after h takes g3. I had already calculated that like a minute after I made my move, that I realized like, oh crap, I am losing, and so I just played this. This is also losing, but at least I thought like maybe I can survive a little bit longer. Truth be told though, pretty much at this point, everything is just busted, and we play some further moves, but like I'm down a pawn and my king is weak, so the probability this is going to work out is just incredibly low. I mean, I'm like hoping that I can stop queen c4 and maybe like get some knight discovery, but realistically it's not gonna really lead anywhere. Maybe some small improvements for both sides, but ultimately I think the loss was more or less inevitable at this point, and he just ends up not quite checkmating me yet, but on the verge of doing so. So I finally resigned, and on that note, a very bittersweet way to end the Melbourne International Open on 3.5 out of 9 after on the first 5 rounds having this exact same score. Actually, the last time I might have had this bad of a losing streak might have been 2017 when at my club championship, this was when I still lived in Melbourne, I won my first game against the top seed. It was like a round robin tournament. I lost my next 7 games, and coming full circle, actually, I broke that losing streak after 7 games against none other than the opponent I played this game, Domagoj, where I managed to draw that game in the Catalan, and that was probably the last time I had such a bad losing streak, to be honest. Otherwise, in recent memory at least, I cannot remember having such a bad run in any sort of tournament like this. But okay, I mean, it doesn't really help to dwell over it too much. What happens happened, and all we can do is really move forward and learn from the experiences, get better, and yeah. Anyways, my next tournament probably going to be the New South Wales Open here in Sydney, where it's going to be 7 rounds in June, so looking forward to that, unless like the state organization somehow gets overthrown or something, but probably won't happen, I think not at least. So yeah, there's going to be still videos coming out between now and then, though, some other content, so stay tuned for that. But anyways, if you found this useful and not too depressing, please leave a like on the video and also subscribe for the channel if you're not already. For more content like this, leave a comment down below what you want to see more from me, maybe in the coming weeks. But yeah, if you guys have a good one, I will see you until next time.